Hi, everybody. Steve Sabludowsky, publisher of BayouBuzz.com. And today it's my honor to have Stephen Waguespack, Louisiana Association Business and Ministry. Stephen, good morning, good afternoon to you. I'm sure that this is the last thing you want to do after a grueling legislative session, but you know, the show must go on. How's it going?
It's going well. It's going well. And look, I understand, you know, it's been a tough couple months for folks watching at home, reading the papers, and there's a lot of interest out there, and there should be. These are big, important issues, so I don't mind at all talking about them.
Sure, absolutely. So let's look back for a second, and let's after that we'll look forward, if you don't mind. And in terms of looking back, you know, right now, I mean, obviously there's got to be some disappointment for everybody. You know, I think that, you know, whether putting blame aside or, you know, I think that generally speaking, you know, we're not able to accomplish what we wanted to do. And that's my take, your take.
Yeah, I mean, look, what I would say is I do think there's kind of universal disappointment out there, but I don't want to say that in a way that it's condemning any particular party for that. You know, I think if you talk to those that are worried about business taxes, they're a little disappointed. Those worried about individual taxes, they're a little disappointed. Those worried about you know funding government, they're disappointed that enough wasn't generated. And those that want smaller government are, you know, disappointed that there was too much generated. So everyone walked away a little bit frustrated. And you know, the governor in his earlier statement, I think maybe in his introductory statement, talked about shared sacrifice. And you know, perhaps this is part of what shared sacrifice feels like. No one really feels content with what happened. Having said that, you know, I do kind of, in a way, feel bad for, you know, there are a number of legislators, I think, that put an intense amount of time and effort into this last session. And, you know, there's a lot of frustration at the end on that last chaotic day. But I think a lot of folks worked pretty hard for a good result, just didn't quite get there at the end. And so I think while there's disappointment, I do think that it is fair to at least say that a number of folks worked really hard over the last month and a half to try to get to a good conclusion, and sometimes you just don't get there in the end. Right.
And of course, you've looked at it from the other side, from the administration side. Yeah. And so in terms of with Governor Jindal, and I'm just wondering, you know, I mean, obviously, the administration, this is probably one of the most frustrating times for administration, and that is, you know, not really being able to achieve what, you know, the administration sets out to start the session.
Yeah, look, you know, just from that type of, you know, political perspective, if you will, you know, I was in the last administration, and we came in after an election and called a special session shortly thereafter. And you know, it's not always easy to learn a new office, make all your hires, get all of your new procedures in place, and then roll right into a special session. And so that's a challenge. And you know, and on top of that, you've got new leadership in the legislature. You've got a lot of new members in spots. If you look at the Ways and Means and Appropriations committees, especially, there are a lot of new members on those committees. Right. An education process has to take place, not just on what the budget is and why it may be broken, but also these nuanced tax code provisions. They're all very complicated. And so there are a lot of new faces and new positions tackling a pretty heavy subject matter. And so it provided another stiff headwind, I think, to getting the comprehensive result some folks may have wanted.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you said, in terms of, you know, really putting the government together. Now, y'all had three sessions, one right after another. Am I correct?
Yeah, there was the ethics special session, and then there was a second session. There was actually something called a surplus back then. I know that feels like a distant memory, but there was a surplus back then where there was some coastal and road infrastructure put in place, and then it rolled right into the regular session. So there were three consecutive sessions, two specials, one regular. And so, you know, after Inauguration Day, it felt like we were in continuous session for about 6 months. And unfortunately, I think some of these new folks here will feel quite the same way.
Sure, absolutely. So why are we in the situation that we're in? I mean, there's got to be a whole bunch of reasons, and I just wanted to get your thoughts.
Yeah, no, and look, you're right. There are a whole bunch of reasons, and I think there's a lot of different ways to look at it. One, you know, you can go back to 1987 even. You know, when Buddy Roemer came in, there were similar challenges. You go pull some of those old Paul reports, they talk about things that we're talking about now. And so some of our issues are systemic issues we've had for generations here. So that's one piece. You know, the second piece is we've got an economy that is struggling right now. I hear that from a ton of our members, especially in the bayou areas in southwest Louisiana. Obviously we lost 11,000 jobs over the last year, 10,000 in the energy industry. It's a big challenge. There's no doubt. And then when it comes to actually the budget structure itself, in our opinion, it's a three-pronged problem of why we're in these chronic deficit cycles. It's a spending problem, it's a budget structure problem, and it's a revenue problem, all three of those. And we spent the last month and a half really focused on the revenue piece. And there's some solution that came out of that, and there's still a gap to go. It would be our, assertion that the next month and a half, 2 months, the next general session should be really focused on those other two legs of the stool, the spending issue and the budget structure issue. And hopefully collectively, if we get to the end of that process, we'll have some revenue alterations, some budget structure alterations, and maybe some spending alterations, and maybe we'll be a little bit closer to being where we want to be at the end of this process than people think at this point.
Now, obviously, we have a real, we have an obstacle to overcome, and that is that we're going into a non-fiscal session. So how much of that are we going to be able to do in terms of long-term fix, or are we going to have to, deal with, say, the spending part in this regular session, and then obviously a special session afterwards?
Yeah, I think when you go into the general session, you have to, the special session we just came out of, the call set the terms of that, and it's specific to several different tax revenues. So that was the pure focus. But there are other reasons why we're in a deficit besides revenue. And so I think what you'll see next session are a couple of things. One, I think on the spending side, I think every agency needs to have tremendous oversight given to it. We need to find efficiencies everywhere we can. If a cut is put on DHH and they offer up a now waiver program, that needs to be immediately rejected and say, don't give us that type of cut, give us something else, and keep pushing back until you get other efficiencies there. That's one piece. And every agency needs to have that type of scrub. Also on other efficiencies like boards and commissions. We've got so many boards and commissions in our state. I think we need to eliminate and consolidate as much as we possibly can on that front. Same thing with contracts. Same thing with dedicated funds. We've got, as we all well spoken about, 400 dedicated funds, gobbling up almost $3.5 billion. Not one of those issues will solve the problem. Not at all. But collectively, if we start doing some of that spending structure side, I really think we can start putting some building blocks together to make our government more efficient. The other side of that coin is not just how we spend in those agencies, but we've got some growing, I would say, entitlement costs, if you will, that have been left unchecked for a long time. A couple examples. Our pension program. We have 4 state pensions. We've got 9 local pensions. Collectively, those 13 pensions are backed by the state. What happens is, over the years, the cost in those pension programs has put a big strain on every dollar we spend. So when we give $1 to K-12 schools or we give $1 to higher ed, more and more of those dollars have to go to those types of costs instead of the classroom. That's a problem. Smart on crime. We have a high incarceration rate in the state. It's very expensive to lock someone up as compared to give them a treatment and training and put them back into the workforce. We've got to embrace smart on crime. Medicaid. Our Medicaid expenses have gone up over $1.2 billion over the last decade. We've talked about expansion or not expansion. That's one debate. The other debate is how can we control costs in the current program? We haven't done that robustly enough. And so I think there's some big cost drivers in the entitlement side. There's some cost drivers in how we can be more efficient, like in boards and commissions and contracts and things like that. And then the other piece is it's just good old-fashioned oversight of agencies and try to consolidate as much of that inefficient spending as we can.
So let me ask you this, putting all that together, assuming that we're successful in all of those 3 prongs, and I know that it's almost impossible to actually get a dollar figure, but is there a range? We have an $800 million deficit coming up for July, and so, we hear cuts, and maybe we can do cuts. Certainly, I think everybody would like to have cuts, but, what are we talking about? 200 million, 300 million, 500 million?
I think it's hard to say, and if you point to any single one, for instance, let's say you unlocked a number of the dedicated funds, and let's say you freed up $2 billion in doing so. Obviously, those $2 billion are not just free cash you can spend on whatever you want. Some of those spending dollars are still spending on priority items. So let's say you may have something in a dedicated fund spending $500,000 a year on something. If you undedicate the fund, you may still want to embrace that program, but it may only need $400,000 instead of the $500,000. So you have to go program by program and figure out where you can still deliver that service efficiently, but maybe the dedicated fund has allowed more dollars that might be necessary on that. That's one piece. The other side is what your question brings up to me is one of the challenges we're facing is on these fiscal notes. The reality is, and this is nothing to say bad about the Legislative Fiscal Office. I think they're working their tail off, and they did the entire session. But the reality is, it was a big challenge in this session in order to see how much bills cost, how much they're going to generate to the state. A lot of the fiscal notes had zero with some type of speculation in there, and so in fact, even the bills we passed more than almost 48 hours ago on the last day of session, several of the big bills don't have fiscal notes up yet. We still don't even know exactly how much money was raised. And so, that is a challenge for legislators and the administration, because when you put a budget together, you have to put it on firm dollars. You can't put it on speculative language in a fiscal note. That's a challenge to know how much we actually save when we do things like that.
And speaking of that, I think that I was watching one of the hearings, and one of the representatives actually noted that and said, well, look, this is a problem we have with government. If we talking about cutting, these economists are just overtaxed in terms of trying to get this information out. It's an imperfect science, but you need more people to do it and to be involved. So is that one of the issues that we have? Right now we have, and I'm just throwing this out for discussion. Right now we have all this flooding on in North Louisiana and mid Louisiana. Obviously, it's going to cost us some pretty pennies. Bridges are out and so on. This is government. We need government to take care of these kind of situations. These are very real type situations that it's really hard to say, well, we just scrub it.
Well, look, I would agree with that. Look, I've been on the inside times when responding to emergencies. Gustav and Ike. I can remember sitting up at 2:00 in the morning and being on phone calls with nursing homes trying to ask where they thought they could shelter in place, and then their HVAC went out, and all of a sudden they need to be evacuated. Those are tough times, and in those moments, you don't want to be saying, well, let me get back to you after I figure out how much it costs. You just do it. You just act. So in those moments, I couldn't agree more, and especially with the flooding going on in North Louisiana, especially a lot of tragic stories we've already heard. You can't be sitting there, trying to cut a good deal. You just have to respond and be quick on your feet on that. So I couldn't agree more.
Okay, but in terms of say the economists, the number of employees. I heard again, this representative was bemoaning over the fact that the economists, like I said, just didn't have enough staff. That they were overwhelmed. I think Greg Albrecht had mentioned, that he was. You saw it. They just couldn't get the work out, and so, I'm just saying that, is this kind of a problem that we have that's systemic, and that is that in areas that we really need, a lot of the money and effort, etc., we just can't get it. And that's going to be a real problem we're going to have going forward.
Well, I haven't heard the fiscal office say that the challenge is they need more money and staff. Maybe that is their argument. What I was, in the session hearing is that, they're dependent on getting information from the agencies, what these dollars would be, getting that information, scrubbing it internally, talking with outside stakeholders. It just takes a lot of time. Mm-hmm. And anytime you have a new session coming in with over 200 plus tax bills dealing with complicated, provisions, especially when you get like exemptions and credits, the sales tax is one piece. You can kind of plug a model in and you pretty much know what you're going to get on a sales tax. When you get into personal income, corporate income, business income, exemptions and credits, it's very challenging for the fiscal office to say, okay, what is that going to bring in? Will it bring in immediately? It will be a year lag. And that is the challenge I think they face on a lot of those issues.
Yeah. So in terms of the cuts, obviously that's going to be the focus of this legislative session. Mm-hmm. Are we going to be able to do the structural things, the third leg that you were referring to? Are we going to be able to do that? The real structural things that will be able to take us forward in terms of not revenues, but in terms of the budget.
I hope so. I feel like, we've been in crisis mode for so long. We kind of feel like it's the only way to budget. And every year we come up short. Every year we look for either a quick fix or a new tax. And, at some point we're going to have to make some reforms that may not reap immediate benefit, but that we know over time will save the state's some dollars, because if we'd have done that years ago on some of these issues, we wouldn't have had that cost creep that we're seeing in parts of our budget. So I hope some of these big items that are soaking up more of our dollars, pension reform being one of them, Medicaid cost control. I'm not really getting into whether it's expand or not, more of the cost control component. There's got to be ways to do that. Some of these smart on crime bills, I think it may not give direct dollars overnight, but I think we'll see as years go by, it will start to, curtail some of those cost runaways we've had. And, if you talk to a K-12 principal or school board person, or if you talk to even a higher ed president, they'll talk to you about the budget challenge. But the next thing you ask them, if you say, look, every dollar we give you is more and more getting out of the classroom and more to your overhead, they'll tell you absolutely. The MFP has gone up $962 million over the last 10 years. But if you ask local schools, they'll feel like they've been cut. That's because more and more of their dollars each year have to go to these overhead costs as compared to the classroom. And so from a taxpayer perspective, it gets frustrating. Like, wait a minute, it's inflated every year. Why are you saying you have no dollars? Well, part of it is because these big entitlement costs are soaking up more and more of their budgets each year.